Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to NASCA TV. We are thrilled to have you in today. As you're coming in, please make sure that you take a second to rename yourself. Make sure that we've got your name, your state, or your company that you're with so we can see who's with us today. We'll give everyone just a moment or two to go ahead and get logged in, connected to audio, and we'll start this afternoon's conversation around inflation and supply chain disruption. We're thrilled to have all of you joining us. And again, welcome. This is our first virtual event of our new program year, and excited to dig into this emerging issue that's impacting all of our states around inflation and supply chain disruption. Again, welcome, welcome. So glad to see everyone dialing in and joining us this afternoon for today's conversation. We have a wonderful set of speakers that will be sharing their thought leadership, their insights, bringing their expertise to the NASCA membership and sharing their conversation with us. So make sure you take an opportunity to rename yourself and drop your information in our chat box as well. We would love to connect with you on social media. Give us your information for LinkedIn, your Twitter handle, as well as Facebook, and we would love to connect with you. Well, again, welcome and good afternoon. This is NASCA TV, and we're talking today about inflation and supply chain disruption. My name is Pam Goins. I'm the executive director here at NASCA, the National Association of State Chief Administrators, where we're unpacking many of the emerging issues happening in state governments today. Again, welcome to today's conversation. We have three wonderful speakers with us today. You're going to hear from them. This is very conversational. This is informational and an opportunity for us to come together around issues that are emerging in our states. We have Commissioner Scott Bollinger, who's with the state of South Dakota. We have Director Joe D'Amico, who is with the Commonwealth of Virginia. And we also have Josh Dakota, who is a cooperative portfolio manager at one of our sister associations, NASPO, and their extension, NASPO Value Point. So we're excited again to have all three of them with us today to talk about this very, very important issue. Before we get too deep in today's conversation, we want to kind of take a poll or a pulse of our audience. So Tammy, would you be kind enough to bring up our first poll question of the day? If everyone would have a chance to respond to this, it will be really important for our speakers and for us to just see what's happening in each of your states as we delve into today's conversation. So here's our first question. Currently, what do you see as your state's number one challenge related to supply chain management? Pick from these. Is it securing raw materials from your suppliers? Are you seeing a significant increase in your material costs? Supplier operational issues or delays? Or is it outdated or inefficient state processes to procure these supplies? Pick what you think your state's number one challenge is at the moment. Of course, we know these things ebb and flow and dip over time, but if you were looking at this list today, what would you say your state's number one challenge is? Looks like a significant increase in cost continues to rise as our number one issue, but followed pretty closely by operational issues or delays on the supplier side. Interesting. We'll give you just another second or two to respond, and we've got one more poll question for you. All right, Tammy, I'll let you end that poll and we'll take a look at how that one concluded. Same way, significant increases in cost. So certainly a timely topic that we're talking about today. All right, Tammy, if you'll bring up our second poll question for us, please. Our second question, which area is the highest priority related to supply chain management in your state? Is it around digitization, automation, reskilling, upskilling your workforce? Is it around efficiency and process improvement, reducing the cost to the states, or also transformational practices and really looking hard at your operating models? What is that highest priority you would say in your individual area right now in your states? Reducing costs, yeah, we're seeing that. lead the way. Almost 50% of the responses in. Interesting. Not many are saying, no one at this point saying that reskilling or upskilling your workforce is one of your highest priorities. Interesting. Digitization also lower than I thought it might be. So Tammy, will you end that for us, please? So again, what we're seeing here is all about the cost. So our states are looking to reduce the cost overall and potentially lower the impact to state economics and budgets. So perfect opportunity to dig into today's conversation. And again, as I mentioned, we have three wonderful speakers here with us that will bring a unique perspective of what's happening in the states, as well as what we're seeing more from a national landscape from one of our national associations. And again, their contract arm, NASCA Value Point. So we're excited to hear from today's speakers, and with some comments, we're going to start with our two state speakers. So Joe and Scott, a question that I'd love to pose to you just as we're starting the conversation, and maybe to just lay the foundation for today's conversation. So we know that each of you serves as a state chief administrator in each of your respective states. So what are you seeing in your state at the moment, specifically related to your supply chain challenges and how that's impacting your cost? Joe, if I can start with you, what are you seeing in Virginia?
Yes, hello, Pam. In Virginia, so I'm going to focus on just a couple areas. One being the impact of the shortage in IT chips and how that kind of ripples through different areas of materials that and items that we purchase in state government. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about construction. Going back to the IT piece, the IT chip piece. So, we have IT chips just about in everything that we do anymore as it relates to operations in government. So let's talk about vehicles. We here in Virginia recently have had a number of manufacturers cancel our vehicle orders for new vehicles because they just simply can't keep up with the demand on the private sector side and the public sector side because of the chip impact. And when it comes to obviously their profit margin, they have a better profit margin on the private side, so they're going to make sure that they take care of the private sector first before the public sector. So impact on state vehicles, IT equipment for new employees that are coming in to the organization and being able to onboard them properly when we're not able to provide the IT equipment that they need to do their job. New construction, renovations. When we think about IT chips, and let me just talk about HVAC systems specifically that have all sorts of IT chips in them that regulate their performance to include their ability to perform in an efficient way. Not having that equipment available when new construction comes online is becoming a problem. IT solutions going into new facilities, smart boards, voting machines. I bring up voting machines because we're getting ready to bring online a new general assembly building that is very IT heavy. And them obviously not being able to vote when this building comes online could be a problem. We're hearing that it's a 6-month delay to a year in some cases to be able to have this equipment available to us. So planning around those timelines is something that we're looking at. We have seen in some cases though, where if we're willing to pay more for equipment, then we're able to reduce some of the impact of the supply chain delay from a time standpoint. So you've got the supply chain timeline impact, but then you've got now the cost impact coming right behind it. On the construction side, a little bit more deeper dive into that in what we're seeing in the construction contractor community. More and more contractors are coming to the owners of construction projects and just quite frankly saying, I'm not going to be able to make the timeline. Or right now, the way inflation is hitting and cost is hitting my bottom line, would I may have bid on before, I may not be able to deliver you the project. If I do, it could put me in a financial difficult situation where I may wind up in default. So then a public body is weighing the that issue is, do I let this contractor go in default, or to try to figure out a way to help out this contractor to be able to deliver this project? And then that has a whole series of issues related to procurement and terms and conditions and things like that. So just a couple items, couple things to think about.
Thanks, Joe. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it is both an acquisition challenge, but also if you're willing to pay a little bit more, perhaps some of those items are available.
In some cases, and it depends. Yes.
Perfect. Scott, what are you seeing in South Dakota?
Well, quite frankly, here I could say ditto to what Joe just covered, but even though we're large geographically, we're a much smaller population and available vendors and contractors in our state. I would add that with all the federal money that has been thrown at all the states and local units of government, we're all competing for the same contractors, the same design firms, going after the same piping for like ARPA related projects, those kinds of things. We're going after the same fiber companies. So we're competing against ourselves, which only adds to the problem. We've got close to $1 million worth of vehicles we ordered last year. We're not sure if we're going to get, let alone what we're going to get this year. And Joe very clearly outlined the problem with getting vehicles. We found that we're spending a lot of time and this is more on the construction side with contractors, being more liberal on the front end when we look at timelines, where normally we would say begin dates June 30th, end dates December 31. We're probably going to put June 30th, give them an extra 6 months, knowing full well that they may or may not get deliveries. The other problem we've had is we've gone directly with some of our contractors to do some projects and try and buy materials direct. A good example was structural steel. They said, I can tell you what the price is when we get it. So public corporate companies like us who have to do low bid, if you don't have a number, how do you determine who's low bid? Because you don't know what you're going to pay for the structural steel. You have the other price, but can you base it just on everything but that? And the way our law runs, it doesn't work that way. So we've had some projects we actually delayed. Hopefully we can get them done next year, but we brought in other projects where materials are all more readily available and we can get contractors to come in and get those done. The other problem we have is, depending on the type of project it is, if it's a supply item, our budgets are good for 1 year. If we can't, get an encumbrance done by placing an order, we lose those funds. And so we're trying very hard to make sure we can get those dollars encumbered. Fortunately, on our construction side, we have the ability, it's a 2-year appropriation. And if it's under contract, we can carry it over for an additional 2, depending on the timeline. So we have some more flexibility there than we do with trying to buy computers or anything else that has a computer chip, or if we're just trying to buy HVAC materials, plumbing materials, we're limited to that 1-year time frame.
And Scott, I know you addressed this a little bit in talking about maybe giving an extra 6 months into a contractual process, but to both of you, were you able to predict this disruption was going to happen and maybe proactively address anything, or has it kind of taken you by surprise and come out of left field?
Well, I think we all got an indication during the COVID, the heavy COVID period, where items were tough to get to begin with. And so we looked at longer lead times, knowing full well that a lot of people aren't showing up for work. I mean, the 3 vehicle manufacturers were completely shut down. You know, you're not getting vehicles if they're closed. But, you know, in other areas, some places, you know, you could find a vendor to get materials from, but the rest of them, you knew it was going to be probably 2 to 3 times longer than the norm. And if you could get it at all. And so we saw some of that coming, but I don't think we believe that it was going to extend for as long as it has. And we're not out of the woods yet in light of the inflation side. And people just haven't come back to work still.
Exactly. Joe, did you have that crystal ball or come as a surprise to you?
Well, yeah, so I think when it initially started, it was difficult, I think, to predict the magnitude of what was coming, what the situation was going to be. I think though, as time went by and things weren't getting any better, I think we as managers were getting better and becoming more knowledgeable of the areas that were impacted the most, and then attempting to try to be a little bit more proactive in our planning. And I'll go back to the fleet example. Is, you know, as we saw these manufacturers starting to slip away, you know, we needed to provide vehicles to our customers. So, you know, how do you go about doing it? So we look at, you know, used car purchases. We look at pulling back underutilized vehicles and redeploying them to individuals and agencies that use vehicles at a higher rate. When we're onboarding our new employees, as we saw again, the issues with being able to buy new computers. Fortunately, our agency had a surplus of computers that we've started to use some of our surplus. And also, when employees leave, we're not so quick to turn them back in to the IT agency for them to pull out of the system, and we hold on to them and repurpose those computers until such time as a new computer comes in for an employee. I will say one area that has been a bit surprising to us here, probably in the past 6 months, and I think it's a result of the inflation that has hit us, is in real estate and leasing property for the use by our public bodies. We're seeing landlords approach deals differently, where before they were agreeable to negotiating fixed rates for an initial term, and our initial terms 3 to 5 years. So that rate was fixed. But now what we're seeing from the landlord community is they want annual escalators in the lease agreement at a minimum of 3 to 5%, and in some cases 100% with CPI. And most of us probably are aware CPI over the past 12 months was 9.1%. So if you're not budgeting for that, and we haven't, you know, in the past, because we've had pretty favorable lease opportunities, that we really need to start thinking about our space utilization and what it is that we actually lease. So, you know, to summarize, you know, I don't think we saw it, at least on the DGS side in Virginia, we didn't see it early on, but, you know, soon after we caught on and are starting to be a little bit more proactive in how we're going about acquiring the goods and services that we need to support the customer base that we support.
Great. Well, thank you to you both. Let me bring Josh in with us now, Josh Dakota, who works with the state chief procurement officials around the country, and also has a great set of expertise around procurement contracts and what's happening on the national side. So Josh has been kind enough to join us today to kind of give us an overview of what their association is seeing. Again, really this national look or view as to what's happening around the supply chain management, the disruptions, and also how it's impacting budgets and economy. So Josh, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Pam. And I really thank Scott and Joe for their perspective as well. And I'm going to echo their same sentiment here. And, when I talk about the supply chain and a lot of the variables kinds of affecting the supply chain, I always kick it off with like a question of, what kinds of issues are you seeing? And do you think that the bigger challenge is pricing, cost, managing all of that, the administrative parts of all of that? Or is it actually getting the product on time when you need it, the right product, the quality product? And, it's been 50-50 in terms of, what the reaction has been. So we're seeing, both of those major issues on either side of the administrative tasks of making sure that you are matching the budget, that the things that you need to get are within your budget, are within those models, and then having to see, hey, these are 5, 6, 7% higher than we budgeted for, and what do we do? So from a procurement perspective, what we're seeing is the continual conversations with suppliers about pricing increases. And then also, obviously, the lead times to get those products or services, but also looking at, making sure that the contracts themselves are sound enough to meet, all of these changes that we've been seeing. And I really like the question about, the crystal ball. So I like to think about it as, a lot of these kinds of, I guess you could call them tools that, procurement has utilized before and maybe not put a lot of significance in. Those have definitely come to the forefront. I'm talking about strategic sourcing, talking about strategies around pricing and, where you're getting the product from. Is it regional? Is it from a national supplier? The reseller models. So a lot of those kinds of things come into play when you're talking about, the pivoting that you have to do when the margins are so small as they already are and pricing is going up. How can procurement play a role in making sure that, the goals as a whole are being met? So when we're looking at RFPs and contracts, making sure that the terms and conditions are meeting the needs. So, I worked in the IT purchasing group for the state of New Jersey. And, I'd say 4 or 5 years ago, probably even more recently than that. But, I think we all prided ourselves on firm fixed pricing. That was an easy thing to evaluate. That was an easy thing to make sure that, the budgets were confirmed for that year. You know exactly how much you were going to be paying for what you were buying. And it was the onus was on the suppliers to make sure that they were crunching their own numbers to make sure that they were, covered for, the life and the term of the contract. Usually, 5 years with 2-year extensions. That was common for the IT purchases. But now you're seeing that model has completely been thrown out. And you're seeing a lot of the suppliers coming to the procurement offices saying, we need to readdress this. We need to look at this. The pricing that was 3 or 4 years ago, we are selling these products to you at a loss. So I always, I think looking at it from, the state perspective, back in the day when I was in the state, it was almost just like, firm fixed pricing. The state is going to dictate these terms and conditions. This is what it is. And if you want to do business with the state, then, this is what you have to do. I think a lot of those conversations are changing and they have to change. I like to say, we're not the state or, just government in general is not in the business of putting businesses out of business. And what we've seen is that a lot of the businesses, small businesses, even mid to large businesses are really towing that line of their risk tolerance in, how much they are cutting into their revenues and trying to stay afloat. So, we have been very proactive in really letting our members know and our state procurement officials know that, it's data driven. So like when I talked about kind of like, the tools that were kind of emerging, they've always been there, but I think there's a lot more emphasis on these kinds of tools. So data driven, what I mean by that is, product and price sheet management. So when you're seeing, the pricing that is being requested to go up, well, you have your current price sheet, you have all of the products that are contracted on that price sheet. They are requesting that their catalog goes up by 10%. Well, what does that actually mean? Their price sheet aggregate could be up 10%, and they're transparent about that. But when you really look into it, and you're really looking at how it is going to impact your state or your institution, what you're going to see is that you're going to have to analyze that at a deeper level. It's not just 10% across the board. Some of those products are going to be, more than 10%. Some of them are going to be less. But having that data-driven, those elements in there of say, hey, this line item right here went up 12%. We buy this way more than we bought a product that went up 5%. So really the aggregate is 10%, but this could affect you a lot more. What does that do to your budget? What does that do to your overall spend? What does that do to your customers that are depending on, price control, and, they already had their budget locked in, and then you're saying that, this is going up 10, 15, 20%. What's the overall impact of that? So when you're looking at those, those price sheets and those product sheets, making sure that you know exactly where you were, what they're requesting, and seeing what those impacts are going to be. Going back to kind of like the terms and conditions with the contract, what you want to look out for as well is making sure that if you are going to grant a pricing increase, or at least going to take a look at it, that you put that flexible language in the contract to say that, we will grant you an increase for 6 months, but we reserve the right to review this in X amount of time, 6 months, and we reserve the right to request the pricing go down. They're not going to go out of their way to give you lower pricing. It's going to be on the state to be able to crunch those numbers, to be able to justify it, and to be able to say this is the pricing that we would like, once those things have subsided, like utilizing CPI, utilizing those indexes. So, we've been seeing that it kind of goes both ways. So in the initial kind of ask of justification, in a lot of our cooperative contracts that we've seen, the supplier documentation and justification that a lot of the states are requiring, they didn't have clear language to begin with, since this has never happened before. So they didn't really have clear justification or documentation in their language to say, hey, this is what we need. This is what you are contractually obligated to give us, so we can look into it and then maybe grant you that price increase. So we have seen news articles that have been included that just talk about inflation and talk about increases. They don't actually specifically communicate, or they're not specifically transparent to the state as to the specific reasons why they are asking for a price increase. So making sure that when you are either constructing or developing an RFP, making sure that you have that language in there. Making sure obviously it's run by general counsel or your AG's office to make sure that it meets all of the statutes. But it would help you going forward to just having that documentation and the justification that the contractors will know if they're awarded a contract. Make sure that everybody's on the same page and that they agree to those terms and conditions of what to provide. If it is an awarded contract that is that they're requesting for the pricing increase to happen, make sure that if you're amending that, to put that language in there. And what we're seeing too is that the suppliers are getting a little, they're getting creative with making sure that they cover themselves. So we've seen, a whole catalog price increase, like I mentioned, the aggregate 10%. We've also seen surcharges. So those are a little bit different to account for. And especially, they're not the price sheet. It is on, the transaction itself. So, that goes into the whole purchase order process, which I'm going to talk about that in a couple minutes. But they're like I think Joe had mentioned with the fleet, there's the different models of leasing. So making sure that, once those kinds of increases, no matter what they are, kind of shift, that you're keeping track of all of that, that you have that data to go back to, saying that, this is how it's impacted us. So it definitely goes into kind of like that benchmarking of your own pricing and how that's gone up and affected you, but then also coupling it with the data that you have on all of your spend reports, what you've bought, how much you've bought, you're seeing that volume. If there are surcharges in there, making sure that that is tracked as well. So when I was in the state of New Jersey, our procurement office, and every state is different how they operate. But our procurement office, we were responsible for developing the RFP, making sure that the terms and conditions were correct and matched up with what they were wanting to purchase. But then, and obviously, evaluating it, awarding it. But then when it was awarded, as an administrative status, the end users and the contract managers on the agency that we were providing the service for, our customers, they were the ones that were involved in the day-to-day. So they were the ones that were cutting the POs. They were the ones that were managing those price sheets. We had an e-procurement system that managed those line items and really provided that control for those pricing data points. So whenever there was an administrative change to those price sheets, the digital price sheets on the e-procurement platform, we would get involved in that. So that was kind of a checkpoint there to just make sure that you're well aware of what's going on within the contract at an administrative level. There was a couple of questions that I had in some of the presentations that I've done about this, where they were from the local level. So they're municipalities, and they did everything from award the contract, develop the RFP, award the contract, but then they also cut their own POs. And it was a really nice conversation to have because they were in the thick of it, in the trenches every single day. So, we had questions about, look, we cut a PO for this 6 months ago. We have an expiration date, it's coming up. And they say, yes, keep this PO open. We don't have the product yet, but there is going to be a price change on that PO. That is a problem too, because when they accepted that PO, they should have, that means that they accepted it for that price, those terms and conditions at that time. So one of my other kinds of pieces of advice is that purchase order management, knowing kind of like the contract compliance with the ordering process, making sure that those POs are very black and white in terms of when that expiration date is. And one thing I'll say on that as well is sometimes you want that PO open for as long as possible. Back in the pandemic days, I was purchasing swabs. We were trying to get swabs for the testing supplies, and we were cutting multi-million-dollar POs, and they did have an expiration date on those. But we found ourselves making sure that that was kind of our place in line. That PO, even though we knew that we weren't going to get it on time, or when we put it in there, having that relationship with the supplier, knowing that we weren't going to get it when we needed it, but having that place in line. So that kind of did change things, where it's like, we just want this to be left open, pretty much an open-ended PO. But now when you're talking about, those everyday purchases, those things kind of still need to stay the same in terms of, hey, we cut the PO, you accepted it for this price, you are agreeing that you will fulfill that PO, and that, the expiration date here, making sure that, if there is a PO for the same kind of product that you cut with another supplier, making sure that you're managing that so you don't have two POs out there. But in the time of the pandemic, when there was an emergency situation, we were cutting the same PO to multiple suppliers just to make sure that we had a place in line to get that stuff. But, the same kind of thing is now, where things are hard to get. So making sure that PO management, that aspect of, if you have those POs out there, making sure that if one is fulfilled, that you cancel the other one, and making sure that you're managing that risk as well. There was a lot of, in these emergency purchases, where the POs would be accepted, and then some of them would be partially filled, and then you would be hit with an invoice that didn't match the PO. that was an administrative nightmare for me at the time. We were on a direct match with the PO and the invoice. And if they didn't match, that was an administrative nightmare for everybody that worked on that. You know, a lot of time and effort, a lot of wasted time to be able to reconcile those. So it kind of goes back to, you know, the administrative task of making sure that product and price sheet is as accurate as possible. And almost like a good rule of thumb is making sure that that price sheet is kind of like a receipt. I use that price sheet a lot because I would say, you know, this is the time and date that this price sheet was confirmed. This is the price that was live when I cut the PO, and this is the price that it should be. So, you know, making sure that those kinds of stopgaps are within your processes, that definitely is one good thing. And then also order tracking. So if you do have a PO that's out there that has been accepted, make sure that, you know, there are no additional surcharges on there. Make sure that you have that language to back up, you know, the pushback when you do give that to them. Say, hey, this is a wrong invoice. You know, all of those kinds of things really do contribute to ensuring that the cost is kept down as much as you can. You know, these are a lot of administrative types of actions that are painstaking in the moment, and having to manage those price sheets, having to compare the price sheets from what they were back 6 months ago. But when we're approached with these different kinds of scenarios and these different requests for pricing increases by the suppliers, one of the things that we look out for on the value point side with our cooperative contracts is the frequency of what we've been being asked. So we have a couple contracts right now where we did leave it open before even the pandemic of every 12 months, we are able to entertain a conversation about a price increase. And it usually was around that 3% for inflation, you know, that's standard before the pandemic and before what we've been seeing. And so, you know, we would see that. And, you know, it was one of those things where I would say it was acceptable back then, but now things have definitely changed. So, you know, just making sure that you are, you know, you have that documentation to look back on and use that as justification when you are in these negotiations. If there is a supplier that is going to say, hey, you know, we didn't give you a price increase, we didn't request this, but we are requesting one now. Always make sure that those price increases are transparent, where, hey, you didn't grant one, or you didn't force us to get one last time, but here you go, here's one this time. And we say, no, this is where you have contractually agreed to that you will not raise your pricing. And that's where the negotiation happens, and that's where the data comes in. That's where you wanted to ensure that all of your kind of justification of these negotiations are in line, that is contractually correct with what you're saying. Because again, this goes back to the original question of, you know, is it pricing that is the biggest challenge, or is it actually getting the product? And what's one of those things that, you know, in the negotiations that it quickly goes to, that I've seen, is that you don't want it to become like a leverage conversation, or kind of like a leverage debate of saying, the supplier saying, hey, we have the product that you need. We can get a lot better price out in the private sector. We don't need to sell it to you. You don't want to get into that leverage play. And that's kind of the risk that we all have to analyze to make sure that those kinds of conversations are held in check, because I'd say it's a delicate balance of making sure that you're controlling your pricing, making sure you're controlling a lot of those administrative types of processes. But then also, on the other hand, when product is scarce, who are the suppliers going to sell to, and what's in their best interest? So that's one of those kinds of risk things that we're seeing out there, just to make sure that, you know, you're having those good relationships with the suppliers, that you're talking to them every day. Don't be overbearing in those negotiations. because we've seen that suppliers, they threaten to walk away sometimes. So having all of that in your mind, again, those data points, having that data, maybe adjusting your e-procurement system to equip you with a lot of that data to go into these negotiations, is some of those best practices that we've seen. So from the procurement side, those are some of the strategies that the procurement offices around the country are implementing. Again, it's kind of ongoing and it's volatile. And a lot of the what you can see out in the CPI and a lot of those index worlds, it is up and down. So like Scott and Joe had mentioned, the volatility, nobody is actually wanting to lock their prices in. And as procurement officials, we've seen that we've had to pivot and be flexible with all of that.
Thank you, Josh. So very, very insightful. And what resonated with me was just the volatile nature that continues. And I don't know that we see that light at the end of the tunnel just yet. So would love to hear Joe and Scott's reactions to that, but maybe from more of a customer experience lens or perspective. How, if it has this impacted your ability to serve the customers that you do within state government?
So, yeah, interesting, Pam. I've used this vehicle example before, and then the leasing example. I mean, it's becoming more difficult for us to be able to provide the services in the goods that they once depended on being able to obtain when they needed them. Right now, they need to start thinking through, I may not be able to get what I need to perform my mission. And then how do I think about then being able to accomplish what it is that is expected of me? I think too, when we start dealing with our customers and our contract pricing, and let me jump over to contractor services, just for anything like admin services or program specialists. Our contracts started out in some cases with a range to be able to bring these skills into an organization from a contractor standpoint. And we were seeing these temporary service contractors being able to deliver people at the lower end of the range. Well, now we're seeing that the only way they can bring these contractors in is at a higher pay rate that's in that range. And maybe our customer agencies weren't budgeted for that higher range, right? So then how are they looking at being able to, again, accomplish their mission? Do they not hire as many people and get some of the work done with the understanding that what they're delivering to their customers, they're then going to have to address it with their customers? Hey, I know we have a responsibility, but we may not be as quick to respond as we were in the past. So, yes, a definite impact to our customer base. I think it's still trying to find solutions for them where we can't perform as effectively as we had in the past and help them work through those issues. But then also just being real with them and saying, this is a point in time where we've got this situation in front of us. And again, we may not be as efficient as we were 1 or 2 years ago. We still take on that obligation, but we all need to understand that it's a different environment in which we're working. And then how do we move forward at that pace and communicate to our customers downstream that is acceptable right now until we get through this situation, is really, from our standpoint is where we're at and how we're addressing it with our customers.
Yeah, and transparency is definitely going to be even more critical during this time. So Scott, I'm curious, there in South Dakota, has this impacted your ability to provide your customer service?
You're on mute, Scott.
It did impact us, but one of the things that early on, we kind of saw some of these might be affected. I mean, the computer chip thing has been out there for quite a while. And we started seeing it with trying to place orders last fall for vehicles and those kinds of things. So we've been communicating regularly with, I do it at the cabinet meetings each month on areas of interest. We've had our procurement people reach out to their contacts in the agencies to let them know if you need some in this area, you better get your orders in now because it's going to take a while to get them potentially if we can, and be prepared for a price increase. I've been in the doghouse with the agencies probably for the last 2 years. Actually, it started before COVID because I was recalling assigned vehicles from people. We had a large number of vehicles that were not being fully utilized and costing us us being the state, a lot of money. So I started taking them back from people. So this only reinforced my ability to take them sooner rather than later, and put them where the people that need them the most, that are out on the road on a regular basis, as opposed to, yeah, I got to drive somewhere once a month. They can go to our pools, and we have several located across the state. But it's one of those deals where I think every time something pops up, as long as we're communicating with our agencies, they appreciate us knowing in advance, or as much in advance as we can tell them, because they all see it in their personal lives too. I mean, go to the grocery store and look at the shelves and, oh, they're out again, or it went up $1 for a loaf of bread or whatever it is. They're all seeing it. So it's not like state government's any different, but as much as we can, let our constituents know that we're on top of it to the extent we can. We're trying to find it for them as fast as we can, and understand that the pricing may not be exactly what we thought it was.
Important. So Scott, let me stay with you if I may. Are there any technology approaches or new innovative strategies that you all have put in place there in South Dakota to address what you're facing?
I think really for us, I mean, we're talking with our vendors on a regular basis to find out from them, what are you guys seeing? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is it 3 months away, 4 months away? Should we be patient and maybe don't put it in now, but maybe put it in October? Things will look better. Put it in October, we can probably deliver. But sometimes that can work to your disadvantage, because now you're not in the pipeline for 3 months and everybody else is ahead of you. So you have to, we talk closely with our the vendors we use the most. But when you try and Joe's probably having the same problem, when you talk to the vehicle dealers, good luck. That's assuming they'll take your call at all. So there are some of those too. Computer salespeople and printers and those kinds of things that require the chips. They'll tell you we're working on it, but I don't think they have any crystal ball that says when they're going to actually start getting more than they're getting today. So, but I think communication is critical with your vendors, with your constituents, and and just keep your ear to the ground. Anytime you hear something might be available, maybe we go off. We have the ability, we can go off contract in certain areas where a different brand of computer may be available, and we can go a different direction and get them to them sooner. But from a technology standpoint, I don't know that there's a whole lot we can do right now.
Yeah, I'll second that, Pam, about the IT coming in and being able to save agencies with these particular issues. It's not an IT problem. I mean, we're dealing with tangible things and resources and the inflation that impacts the acquisition of those items. So I don't think IT is going to be the silver bullet here for the inflation and for the supply chain issues that we see.
Yeah, good to hear. So let me just wrap up with Joe and Scott. Both of you serve as a state chief administrator. You lead a variety of different areas of responsibility in each of your states. So as a leader, how are you thinking more strategically about reducing the cost so it will have a more positive impact on your state budgets and your economies? Joe, start with you.
I'll jump in there.
Yeah.
So Pam, I'm going to say something that, is just a D'Amico personal opinion. I don't think we're going to be able to reduce costs. I think we are at a point in time where we've gone through this inflation, continue to be in it, that the vendor community probably is in a position of, particularly when they had, maybe year-long contracts, where they probably impact their margin over this past year. Now they got to play catch up and make up, right? And so they're going to start pricing their goods and services appropriately to make up what they lost from a profit margin standpoint previously, but then now price it at what now the inflation costs are going forward. So, when at least I look at it from reducing our, cost to us in our budget going forward, I'm more in the mode of how do I reduce the expected impact of what's coming down the pike. And some of the things I'm looking at, Josh kind of talked about procurement and leveraging volume purchasing by cooperative agreements, again trying to leverage the volume there. Looking at where we go after leased property, maybe go after it in places where the market isn't as hot, so you've got more of a negotiating leverage there, and again trying to lock in a lease rate for a longer period of time. Look at surplus property in our federal and state surplus programs and repurposing materials that would otherwise maybe be put out to the private sector for sale, but how can we repurpose it in the public sector? And then, looking to ask high performers in your organization maybe to take on more responsibility with an incremental compensation for that versus going out and hiring a new FTE with the salary drain that the full load of a new salary coming into the organization. So just some random thoughts on that question.
Scott?
Well, I think Joe kind of hits it a little bit. We all struggle to find additional, replacing our existing employees. But maybe we look at mining the talent that we have and paying them a little bit more, and using those folks that are, know how to dig through this and have the tenacity to work through it might be an option. Along the lines of lease space that Joe touched on, one of the things we started a year and a half ago, as I mentioned, we're a fairly sparsely populated state, but we're fairly spread out. So a big city for us is anything over 10,000. But one of the things we've done, and we're on community number 5, is we've gone to having state one-stops, where we've had a private vendor come in, build a building for us, and consolidate 6 to 8 agencies into one location, so that our constituents, when they need service, they go one place, they don't have to drive to 6 or 7 of them. And what it's forced our vendor community that have our current leaseholders is to take a look at, well, why are they leaving me? And a lot of it has to do with they've let their properties run down. They're in bad areas of the community, and they've done nothing to be responsive to improving the lives of our employees in their buildings. So we've gone to the one step or stop concept. Like I mentioned, we've got 4 already, 2 done, 2 in the works, are nearing completion, and 1 additional one in planning stages, where we're going to consolidate a lot of leases into one, and the vendor market's going to be basically left with properties. Now what do I do? So if they do want to come back to us at some point, and look at leasing to us, maybe they're willing to be a little more amenable to negotiating price and the length of the contracts. I think on the procurement side, I think some of the things strategically going forward, we may have to look at certain types of contracts that we put out there, that maybe we do 3 to 6 month pricing and either rebid it, or we have the ability to negotiate for another 3 to 6 within some reasonable parameter, so that the vendor can say, okay, I'm not stuck with this for a year, but I may not get a 9% increase, but I might get a 3%, which is certainly more manageable for state budgets than a 9% increase. But we're going to have to be pretty strategic when we come to that, as to what does that mean in total dollars. We're very fortunate that the economy in South Dakota is very strong. We just ended the year with excess revenues of $115 million. So there's opportunity there for, to make up some ground in the current year to help pay for some of the projects we know are underfunded because of the current situation. But going forward, it provides us an opportunity maybe to do some things with agency budgets that previously we couldn't do.
Yeah, very, very helpful across the board. So Josh, let me bring you in for one final comment here and thought. As our state teams are going back tomorrow and starting to continue to tackle the inflation that we're seeing, the supply chain disruptions that are continuing, Josh, from your perspective, what's one key takeaway you'd like the group to think about today?
And I'm gonna steal something that I saw in the chat, but it's great for alliteration fans. Consistent communication with vendors and constituents is critical. I think that we've talked a lot about the relationships with your customer base, those that are depending on the procurement office to get what they need with the lowest risk possible, the best price, but then also pivoting that relationship also to the supplier community. It is difficult out there. It is very tough when the margins are very thin, and it is very difficult when you can't get the things that you need. And then from the other perspective of the supplier community, a lot of things are outside of their control. So we've felt a lot of that frustration from our membership, from those central procurement offices. But just one of those things to remind everybody is, having that solid relationship or having that that clear communication, consistent communication will hopefully yield good results.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all 3 of our speakers today, Josh, Joe, Scott. This has been such a wonderful conversation today, and we certainly appreciate you joining us. Be on the lookout for some information for NASCA for our next emerging issue, which is around sustainability of federal funding. It's going to be on Wednesday, August the 18th. At 3 p.m. Eastern time. And also be sure to check out all of our information around NASCA's Institute on Management and Leadership coming up in Scottsdale this September, and one of our pre or post summits, one around operational excellence and one on creating a sense of belonging across the talent pipeline. All 3 of those events are going to be held in Scottsdale mid-September, and we certainly hope that all of you will join us. Again, thank you so much for coming to NASCA TV. We will see you again next month. Bye-bye.